She craved a gentle touch. The alien gave her something far more intimate. The proximity alarm screamed 3 seconds before impact. Kira's fingers flew across the navigation panel, rerouting power, adjusting thrusters, doing everything the emergency protocols demanded. Nothing responded. Through the viewport, the moon's surface rushed up to meet them, a jagged landscape of silver stone and crystal formations that would shatter their transport like glass. "Brace!" she shouted, though there was only one other passenger to hear. The Thriss sentinel across from her had already secured himself, his silver-blue hands gripping the restraints with preternatural calm. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, hers wide with human terror, his dark and fathomless. Then the world became noise and violence. Metal shrieked. The transport tumbled through space, clipping an outcropping that tore away the starboard side. Kira's harness cut into her shoulders as gravity lost all meaning. She caught glimpses through the spinning viewport. Stars, stone, the yawning mouth of a cavern, then impact that rattled her teeth and turned her vision white. Silence felt like a weight. Kira hung suspended in her harness, ears ringing, tasting copper. Slowly, sensation returned. Pain in her ribs, the acrid smell of burned circuitry, the strange blue glow emanating from crystal formations outside the cracked viewport. They were inside something, a cavern massive and glittering with bioluminescent minerals. Functional? The word came in accented standard, deep and careful. She turned her head, groaning. The Thriss, Vakar, she remembered from the passenger manifest, was already free, moving toward her with fluid grace despite the wreckage. His uniform was torn at the shoulder, revealing skin that seemed to shimmer with internal light, the luminescent markings along his arms pulsing in a slow, steady rhythm. "I think so," Kira managed, fumbling with her release mechanism. He reached past her, and she caught a scent like ozone and winter air. The harness clicked free, and she nearly collapsed before his hand steadied her elbow, then jerked away as if burned. "The others?" she asked, though dread already filled her chest. Vakar's expression remained neutral, but those markings dimmed. "We are alone." The words settled over her like ice. Alone, stranded on an uninhabited moon with a strange alien whose species she knew nothing about. The emergency beacon would broadcast their location, but rescue from the nearest station would take days. Kira wrapped her arms around herself as the reality crashed over her, harder than the impact had. 3 days, maybe 4. In this frozen tomb of crystal and darkness, with nothing but wreckage and a stranger who wouldn't even touch her without flinching. The trembling started in her hands and spread inward, shock finally claiming what adrenaline had held at bay. The temperature dropped as the moon's brief day cycle ended. Kira had salvaged what she could from the wreckage. 2 thermal blankets, emergency rations, a medical kit. But her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the supplies twice. The crash kept replaying in her mind. The screaming metal, the moment of weightlessness, the certainty of death. She'd been fine while working, focused on survival tasks, but now sitting on the cold stone floor of the cavern, with nothing left to do but wait, the tremors wouldn't stop. Vakar maintained his distance, perhaps 10 feet away, working on the emergency beacon. His movements were precise and methodical, those luminescent markings providing enough light to see by. He hadn't spoken since confirming they were alone. The isolation pressed down on her chest. 3 days of this silence. 3 days of being so close to another living being, but utterly alone. "Vakar?" Her voice cracked. He looked up immediately, those dark eyes catching the crystal light. "I just..." She hated how small she sounded. "Could you just sit closer? I know it's stupid, but It is not stupid." He moved toward her with that unsettling grace, settling onto the ground an arm's length away. Close enough to share warmth, too far to touch. But it wasn't enough. The walls of the cavern felt like they were closing in, the darkness beyond the crystal glow suddenly infinite and suffocating. Kira had spent years after her divorce learning to be alone, convincing herself she preferred it. Now faced with forced isolation and the trauma of nearly dying, every defense she'd built crumbled. "I'm sorry," she whispered, reaching out. "I just need..." Her fingers brushed his hand. The world inverted.
Sensation flooded through her, not physical, but emotional, visceral. She felt his surprise crash into her concern, felt underneath it a bone-deep loneliness that mirrored her own, and beneath that something else, the ghost of violence, the weight of duty, the aching isolation of being the last guardian of a dying outpost. And threaded through it all, a startling warmth directed at her specifically. Curiosity, protectiveness, a fascination he'd been carefully suppressing. Kira gasped and tried to pull back, but Vecca's fingers tightened around hers, his markings flaring bright. Now she felt his alarm at the connection breaking, the instinctive need to maintain it until it resolved safely. Through their joined hands, she understood, his species didn't just touch. They shared. I tried to warn, his voice was strained. But the wave crested again. This time she felt her own emotions reflected back through his awareness. Her fear, yes, but also her wonder at his alien beauty, the unexpected comfort of his presence, the realization that she'd been watching him throughout the journey more than professional courtesy required. He'd noticed. Of course he'd noticed. When the connection finally ebbed, they sat frozen, hands still intertwined, both breathing hard. The markings on Vecca's arms pulsed erratically, cycling through colors she had no reference for. I apologize, he said quietly. My people. We do not touch casually. This is why. You felt everything. It wasn't a question. As you felt mine. His thumb moved almost imperceptibly against her palm, and she felt an echo of emotion, regret, but also something tender. I should have pulled away. Why didn't you? The markings steadied into a deep blue. Because you needed comfort. And I. He paused. I have been alone for a very long time. Kira's heart hammered. Every rational thought screamed at her to release his hand, to rebuild her walls, to protect herself from this impossible vulnerability. But his touch had shown her something she'd forgotten, what it felt like to be truly seen by someone. Not just acknowledged, but understood at a level words could never reach. She didn't let go. The first night passed in careful silence. They'd separated after that initial overwhelming connection, both needing space to process what had happened. Kira wrapped herself in a thermal blanket on one side of their makeshift shelter, while Vecca kept watch near the cavern entrance, his luminescent markings dimmed to a soft glow. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the echo of his emotions, that vast loneliness, the fierce protectiveness that had surged when he'd felt her fear. And underneath it, something she'd tried not to examine too closely, desire. Not crude or simple, but complex and reverent, the way his species experienced attraction. Through touch, she'd felt how he saw her, brilliant, resilient, beautiful in a way that transcended physical form. No one had ever seen her like that. Certainly not her ex-husband, who'd loved the idea of her more than the reality. As dawn's pale light filtered through the crystal formations, Vecca approached with a ration pack. You should eat. Their fingers brushed during the exchange. The connection sparked instantly, softer now, more controlled, but still present. She felt his concern for her well-being, and he felt her gratitude. They broke apart quickly, but not before a flush of warmth passed between them. Does it always happen? Kira asked, opening the ration pack with trembling fingers. The connection. With my people, yes. With humans. He settled nearby, maintaining that careful distance. I did not know it was possible. We have little contact with your species. What do you usually do to prevent it? We do not touch those outside our family bonds. His markings shifted to a muted grey. It is lonely in your space stations. Everyone touches so casually, handshakes, shoulder pats, gestures of comfort. I spent 2 years on Outpost 7, and never once felt another's warmth. The ache in his voice made her chest tighten. That's why you pulled away before. In the crash. I did not want to burden you with my emotions when you were already overwhelmed. Kira studied him in the growing light. His features were angular but not harsh, his silver-blue skin marked with those luminescent patterns that betrayed his every feeling. She'd thought him cold during the journey, aloof. Now she understood, he'd been starving for connection while surrounded by it, unable to partake. What if I don't consider it a burden? His eyes met hers, those markings flaring bright. Kira. I felt what you gave me yesterday. Comfort, yes, but also understanding. You felt my loneliness and recognized it because you live with the same thing. She set down her ration pack. Maybe we don't have to be alone right now. You do not understand what you are asking. But his voice held longing, and she felt the truth. He wanted this as much as she did. The more we connect, the deeper the bond becomes. It is not meant to be temporary. Nothing is permanent. You taught me that when I felt your memories, you've lost people, places, entire worlds. But you still choose connection when you can. Veka was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he extended his hand palm up between them. An offering, an invitation, a question. Kira placed her hand in his. This time, the flood was gentler, like slipping into warm water. She felt his surprise at her acceptance, his carefully restrained hope. In return, she let him feel her curiosity, her attraction to both his otherness and his surprising familiarity. Through the connection, he showed her fragments of his world, vast forests of crystalline trees, cities built into living stone, the ritual of bonding where his people would touch for days until their emotions harmonized into permanent partnership. She showed him her memories in return, childhood laughter, the betrayal that had taught her to guard her heart, the moment in the crash when she'd looked at him and felt inexplicably safe. His fingers tightened around hers. They spent hours that way, learning each other's language through touch. Every brush of skin revealed new layers. When he traced the inside of her wrist, she felt his or at her pulse. When she touched the markings on his forearm, he trembled, and she understood. These were intensely sensitive, meant only for intimate bonds. She didn't pull away. The second night arrived with plummeting temperatures that turned their breath to mist. Kira had rigged the thermal blankets into a shared shelter, knowing survival demanded they conserve heat. But as darkness fell and the cold seeped through stone, necessity became something else entirely. We need to stay close, Veka said, his voice carefully neutral even as his markings pulsed with barely suppressed emotion. The temperature will drop further. Kira nodded, her heart racing as they settled together beneath the blankets. The moment their bodies pressed close, the empathic connection ignited like a living thing between them. But this time, neither fought it. Through his touch, she felt everything. The way her warmth against him created a sensation his species considered sacred, the protective instinct that made him position himself between her and the cavern's opening, the building desire he'd been restraining since that first overwhelming connection. And he felt her response, the way her pulse quickened not from fear but anticipation, the realization that she felt safer in his arms than she'd felt anywhere in years, the dawning understanding that vulnerability wasn't weakness but courage. I spent so long protecting myself, she whispered against his shoulder. Through their connection, he felt the memory, her ex-husband's affairs, the way he'd made her feel insufficient, her decision to never risk that pain again. I thought being alone was the same as being strong. Veka's hand traced up her spine, and she felt his response without words. Strength was choosing connection despite the risk of loss. His people understood this deeply. Every bond carried the potential for devastating grief, yet they chose to love anyway because the alternative was a life half-lived. Your species fears vulnerability, he said softly, his markings casting gentle blue light across her face. Mine reveres it. We believe the greatest act of bravery is allowing another to truly see you, all your flaws, fears, and broken places, and trusting they will honor what you share. Kira pulled back enough to meet his eyes. Through their joined awareness, she felt his question before he spoke it. May I know all of you? Her answer came not in words but in surrender. She lowered every wall, let him feel every inadequacy she tried to hide, every moment of loneliness she pretended didn't hurt, every secret hope she'd buried for safekeeping. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. And Veka met her openness with his own. She felt the weight of duty that had defined his existence, the guilt of being the sole survivor when his outpost fell, the fear that his capacity for love had died with his people. She felt his wonder at finding her, this human woman who'd inadvertently cracked open his carefully sealed heart. As the night deepened, their connection intensified into something that transcended physical touch. Every breath synchronized, every heartbeat echoed between them. When he cradled her face with infinite tenderness, she felt his reverence. When she traced the luminescent patterns on his skin, he shuddered with pleasure that rippled back through her awareness, amplifying and returning in waves. "This is what bonding feels like," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "For my people, this level of connection, it changes you. You will carry part of me, and I part of you, even after we separate." "I know." And she did. Through their link, she understood the permanence of what they were creating. "I'm not afraid anymore." His markings flared bright, cycling through colors that translated to joy, desire, and a love so profound it made her chest ache. They stayed entwined through the long cold night, communicating in a language older than words, learning that true intimacy wasn't about physical perfection or even physical compatibility. It was about two souls brave enough to be completely, vulnerably seen. As dawn approached, Kira realized something fundamental had shifted. She'd spent years equating independence with safety, convinced that needing no one meant no one could hurt her. But Veka's touch had taught her a different truth. Real strength came from risking connection, from choosing trust even when past wounds screamed warnings. The walls she'd built hadn't protected her, they'd imprisoned her. The rescue ship's engines hummed overhead at dawn on the third day, the sound pulling Kira from the half-sleep she'd drifted into wrapped in Veka's arms. For a moment, she didn't move, savoring the warmth of his body against hers, the steady pulse of emotions flowing between them through their maintained touch. Then reality crashed back. Rescue meant returning to her life, her solitary apartment, her careful routines, her world of superficial connections and emotional safety. Veka stirred, his markings shifting from the deep purple of contentment to muted grey. Through their bond, she felt his grief already taking shape, the anticipation of loss cutting deeper because he'd allowed himself to hope. "The transport is here," she whispered unnecessarily. "Yes." His arms tightened around her briefly before releasing. "We should signal them." But neither moved. The rescue team would find them easily enough with the beacon's coordinates. These final moments were theirs alone. Kira sat up, and the loss of contact created an immediate ache. 3 days ago, she would have welcomed the separation. Now, it felt like tearing away part of herself. "What happens now?" she asked, though their connection already showed her his thoughts. He would return to his assignment, alone again among humans who would never touch him. She would return to Earth, carrying his imprint in her heart, forever changed by a bond that had no place in her ordinary life. "We return to our lives." Veka's voice was steady, but his markings betrayed him, flickering between resignation and desperate longing. "This, what we shared here, perhaps it was only meant for this moment." "Was it?" Kira challenged. Through their weakening bond, she felt his careful control, the way he was trying to make this easier by pretending it meant less than it did. "Or are you giving me an escape because you think that's what I want?" His eyes met hers, and she felt the truth crash through him. He was terrified she would choose safety over him. That the woman who'd spent years building walls would retreat behind them the moment real life resumed. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, her voice shaking. A relationship with someone from another species, separated by space stations and assignments, based on a connection most people will never understand. "Every logical part of me says it's impossible." Logic is not foolish. But his markings dimmed further. "Let me finish." She reached for his hand, and the connection flared back to life. Through it, she let him feel everything, her fear, yes, but also her certainty. "Logic says it's impossible. But 3 days ago, I thought I was happy being alone. You showed me I was just hiding. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the only way to truly live." His markings began to brighten. "My marriage failed because I chose someone safe who wouldn't challenge me, wouldn't really see me. I thought that was what I wanted." She laced her fingers through his. "But you see everything, every flaw, every fear, and you don't look away. That's terrifying. It's also the most real thing I've ever felt." "Kira." "I don't know how we make this work," she continued. "Long distance, different species, a bond that literally only we can understand. But I know that going back to my safe, lonely life would be the real failure. You taught me that some things are worth the risk." Through their connection, She felt his hope ignite like a star being born. Brilliant, overwhelming, impossible to contain. His other hand came up to cradle her face, and the wave of love that passed between them needed no translation. "My people have a saying," he said softly. "The bravest hearts beat in rhythm with another's. I thought I had forgotten how to be brave until I touched you." The rescue team's voices echoed from outside the cavern. Reality approaching, demanding decisions. Vecca stood, extending his hand one final time, not an ending, but a beginning. "I am assigned to Outpost 7 for 6 more months. It is a lonely station, and my quarters are cold." His markings cycled through every color of hope and invitation. But perhaps they would be less so if a certain communications engineer requested a transfer. Kira looked at his offered hand, feeling the weight of the choice. 6 months ago, she would have seen only risk, the danger of needing someone, of building a life around connection that might fail. But Vecca's touch had taught her to see differently. Yes, love was a risk. Opening yourself to another person, human or alien, meant accepting the possibility of pain. But living in fear of that pain wasn't protection. It was a slower kind of death. Real courage meant choosing connection anyway, trusting that what you built together would be worth whatever challenges came. She took his hand, and through their bond, she felt his joy merge with hers until they couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. "I'll submit the transfer request today," she said, then smiled. "Fair warning though, I've been told I'm difficult to live with. I hog blankets and I'm terrible at cooking." His laughter rumbled through their connection, warm as sunlight. "And I have been told I'm too quiet, too distant, too alien to ever truly connect with humans. Perhaps we are both wrong about ourselves." As they emerged from the cavern to meet the rescue team, hands still intertwined, Kira understood the truth that would guide the rest of her life. Walls might keep pain out, but they also kept love at bay. Real strength wasn't found in isolation. It was built in the space between two people brave enough to be vulnerable together. Some lessons, she realized, could only be learned through touch. And some bonds, once formed, weren't meant to be broken. They were meant to teach you how to be whole.